Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most audacious, most baffling crimes of the 20th century. It's a story that starts on an airplane and just disappears into a stormy night sky.
So, picture this. It's 1971. A man, calling himself Dan Cooper, hijacks a Boeing 727. He demands a huge ransom, gets it, and then just vanishes. Jumps right out of the back of the plane into the darkness. He created a legend and a mystery that, to this day, nobody has been able to solve.
All right, let's get right into it. We're going to start on the day it all went down, November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. The whole thing played out with this eerie sense of calm. This guy, just a man in a suit and a trench coat, gets on a flight. He passes a note to a flight attendant and then quietly shows her what looks like a bomb in his briefcase. No yelling, no panic. He just takes control, gets his money, and sets up this completely impossible escape. And what he wanted, his main demand, was $200,000 in cash. Now, that might not sound like a crazy amount today, but back then, that's the equivalent of over $1.5 million, all delivered in a heavy bag filled with $20 bills. But here's where it gets really interesting. It wasn't just about the money. Look at these other demands he made. These aren't just random things he's asking for. He's telling them exactly how to fly the plane. Low altitude, slow speed, flaps at a certain angle. This is a very specific flight configuration, one that's perfectly calculated to make a parachute jump from a 727 even possible. This guy wasn't just some amateur. Whoever he was, he knew exactly what he was doing. So the plane takes off again from Seattle. The flight crew is locked in the cockpit, totally blind to what's happening in the back. The whole flight to Reno is just silent. When they finally land and cautiously open that cockpit door, the cabin is empty. The big staircase at the back of the plane is down, and Cooper, he's just gone.
Think about this for a second. He jumped out of a moving airplane at night into a freezing, raging rainstorm over a massive, pitch-black forest in Washington. For the FBI, the problem was immediate. Their suspect had literally vanished into thin air.
So investigators just swarm the plane, right? They're desperate for any clue, anything at all. And what do they find? Almost nothing. A clip-on tie, a few cigarette butts, which were actually lost later, believe it or not, and the 2 parachutes he decided not to take. He was even smart enough to ask for the original ransom note back. It was like he was a ghost. He was never even there.
For 9 long years, the case was completely cold. Nothing. It looked like D.B. Cooper had actually done it, pulled off the perfect crime. And then, in 1980, something totally unexpected happened. A kid, out on a riverbank, made a discovery that blew the whole investigation wide open again.
So, there's this young boy, Brian Ingram. He's out camping, building a campfire on a sandy beach called Tina Bar on the Columbia River. He's just digging in the sand and he finds these 3 bundles of rotting cash. It added up to $5,880.
And you guessed it, the serial numbers were a perfect match for the ransom money. But this discovery just created a whole new puzzle. Tina Bar was miles and miles away from where the FBI thought Cooper had jumped. So how in the world did that money get there? This finding just sent investigators down a total rabbit hole. Okay, so theory 1. Did the money just float down the river? Probably not. The main river flows the wrong way. Okay, what about theory 2? Maybe it was moved by a dredging machine that was working in the area. It's possible, but the evidence was kind of shaky. But then they found the crucial clue. The rubber bands holding the cash together were still intact. The FBI ran some tests, and they figured out that could only happen if the money had been buried pretty soon after the hijacking, probably within a year. And that doesn't sound like an accident. That sounds like a person. And that clue, the idea that someone buried that money, leads us right to the single biggest question that has obsessed people for more than 50 years. Did Cooper actually survive the jump?
The arguments for both sides are just so compelling, right? On one hand, the case against him surviving seems like a slam dunk. He jumped into a freezing storm over a dense forest at night wearing a business suit and loafers. And get this, the main parachute he took was actually a non-functional training chute that had been sewn shut. It was basically a suicide mission. But, on the other hand, nobody was ever found. Not a single trace. No missing person report ever really matched his description. And then there's that buried money. That's the biggest piece of the puzzle, suggesting that someone, maybe Cooper himself, landed, walked away, and buried a part of the loot.
And what about his motive? It just adds to the whole enigma. When one of the flight attendants asked him why he was doing this, if he had a grudge against the airline, his answer was so strange. He said,
It's not because I have a grudge towards your airline. It's just because I have a grudge. It offers no real clue as to who this guy was.
So if there's even a chance he survived, the next question is obvious. Who was he? And that question kicked off one of the longest, most massive manhunts in the history of the FBI.
Okay, first things first, a little clarification. We all know him as D.B. Cooper, but he actually called himself Dan Cooper. D.B. Cooper was a mistake made by a reporter that just stuck, and the alias Dan Cooper itself might have come from this old French-Canadian comic book hero, which has led some people to wonder if he wasn't even American.
Over the decades, literally thousands of people were looked at. You had guys like Richard McCoy, who pulled off an almost identical hijacking just 5 months later. You had Robert Rackstraw, a former Army paratrooper with a pretty shady past. Then there was Dwayne Weber, who on his deathbed told his wife, "I am Dan Cooper." But here's the thing. For every single suspect that seemed promising, there was always some critical flaw. The age was wrong. The DNA didn't match. The flight attendant said, "No, that's not him." Always a dead end.
And so, finally, in 2016, after 45 years of searching, the FBI officially closed the active investigation. It remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in American history. They basically said, look, unless somebody literally trips over his parachute or the rest of the money, this case is probably never going to be solved.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with the ultimate question. Was this guy, D.B. Cooper, a criminal mastermind who planned every single detail and executed a flawless crime? Or was he just some amateur who made a ton of mistakes, but through some incredible dumb luck managed to stumble his way into becoming a legend? The truth is, we may never know.